Hi, my name is Felicia. I'm a graduate student at the Indiana University School of Journalism. I am bringing this to you as a form of a media critic about how the media has portrayed Africa over the years. What led me to this, you say? Over the past few months or years, we've seen the outbreak of the Ebola virus, and the media has done a pretty good job in covering it. At the same time, some have done a pretty bad job. Let's take a look.
According to science, Ebola could be contracted through fruit bats, which are widely known in some parts of West Africa. So what does this Newsweek cover and the caption have to do with this? What exactly is the Newsweek saying? I don't know, because this cover only further sensationalizes what is going on with the Ebola outbreak, and it also promotes many of the misconceptions about Africa. And this is just one example.
About the outbreak of Ebola, this is the response an average well-educated American person. I take that back. This is the response of a rich, well-exposed person who doesn't live in Africa.
President Obama, it's time for you to stop the flights coming in from West Africa. Why are you putting our country in danger? Stop the flights now.
What a lot of people have learned over time is Africa, or West Africa, is ravaged with Ebola. But that is not the case. Let me show you.
Areas with the red markings on them represent the countries in West Africa that were battling or are still battling the deadly virus. By the end of August 2014, Nigeria had treated her last case of Ebola, even though she was not officially cleared till October by the WHO. I spoke with Razak, a Nigerian graduate student at the IU School of Public Health. He says that if people were calling for flights to be banned from West Africa, what about the neighboring states here in the U.S.?
When we had a case of a politician, a Republican politician, whose name I don't want to mention, but I think we all know, who said that flights from West Africa should be banned. I wonder what he's going to say now that we have cases in Texas. Maybe he'll probably say, let's cut Texas out from the rest of the country, like flights from Texas to other parts of the country should also be banned. I mean.
But this does not seem to bother a lot of the mainstream media, considering the fact that Andrea Tentros of Fox News had this to say.
I'll say it before, I'll say it again. In these countries, they do not believe in traditional medical care. So someone could get off a flight and seek treatment from a witch doctor that practices Santeria. This is a bigger fear. We're hoping that they come to the hospitals in the U.S. They might not.
Not only is this an uneducated opinion, it is extremely offensive, and it should not be encouraged for a media personnel.
Laura C., a professor of government at Colby College, wrote an article for the Washington Post titled, "The Long and Ugly Tradition of Treating Africa as a Dirty, Diseased Place." She says the article was written to let people in the media know they have to be careful in covering these stories. C. went on to explain a concept called othering.
And when it comes to the question of people from Africa, people directly from Africa, immigrants these days, or people who are African, who live in Africa but are traveling to the United States or something like that, unfortunately what we've seen with this Ebola crisis is, in many ways more of the same. I mean, the calls to ban all flights from West Africa or to isolate people who've come from places in Africa that are 3,000 or 4,000 miles away from the Ebola outbreak area, they're just really irrational, and they seem to be rooted in these notions that Africans don't belong, that there's something different, and, these really racist ideas that Africans carry disease, that Ebola is somehow different from other kinds of diseases that kill people like the flu or enterovirus or, things that we experience much more commonly here in the United States.
She also says that there's double standards in the way these stories are being reported.
For example, last month the New York Times ran a cover photo of a little girl who was in an Ebola treatment unit in Liberia, and she was clearly very, very ill. She was laying on the floor, surrounded by fluids, bodily fluids, cleaning fluid like ammonia. And that there's an argument there to be made that the American public wouldn't understand the severity of the crisis if they didn't see how really horrific these things are and how horrible it is to be dying of Ebola. But on the other hand, the New York Times would never print a picture of an American child, and I think of even a white child in another country. They would never print a picture of a vulnerable child like that. And that's because, right, American hospitals would not allow them to take that picture. And so you get into all kinds of questions of, like, is there a double standard for coverage of Africa? And I think that the Ebola situation has brought that into really stark relief. And my answer would be yes, there's absolutely a double standard.
I met Daniel, a filmmaker and a student at University of Texas. He says that the problem of the media presenting Africa the way it does isn't a new one.
He says the mainstream media tends to feed the audience exactly what they want.
Even though they are reporting the news, the way it's reported is always done in a way to feed the audience what they need or what they want, so to speak. And so I think that's the main difference between news reporting here in the United States and news reporting elsewhere.
C further explains that U.S. newsrooms believe there is a certain way the news from Africa should be covered.
And I think that there's this real, understanding in newsrooms in the U.S. about how Africa is, quote unquote, supposed to be covered, and that, audiences in the U.S. are not interested in good news or in things that don't reinforce the stereotypes that they already have about the continent. I think that's a real problem.
She says a better way to end this is to hire local correspondents in each country. That way, there's better coverage of what exactly is going on in that country.
The idea that you need an outsider to explain African news to Western audiences, I think, is a really outdated. And the idea that Africans, are not good enough to cover their own news, to me seems just like a really prejudiced and neo-colonial idea. And if the issue is training, I mean, it's not rocket science, right? Like, we know how to train people to be journalists. And so just do it. Stop making excuses and do it. And maybe the era of the Western correspondent who's responsible for covering 20 countries, I mean, in the era of the internet and fast-moving news, that era may be over.
She also says even though the news about the African continent is of low priority to the U.S. audience, the misconceptions presented by this media has grave effects on the people.
I mean, we've seen stories of, people being chased off playgrounds or told not to come to work, or all these just really horrific things that are not representing what America is supposed to be about.
Daniel also agrees to that.
Having people who know about what they're talking about, not just some random guy in Washington or Atlanta trying to be an expert or an authority on issues in Liberia. Even saying the word Africa hurts me so much because I know that it continues to promote this concept of we're all the same, but we're really not.
But even then, he says it is not too late to start making things right.
So I think really educating people more about the individual cultures, the individual ethnic groups, and the different ways of life that exist in the continent. And slowly we can break down this concept of referring to those people as Africans as opposed to Nigerians and Liberians and Yorubas and Swahili.
I'm at a museum right now. And the good part about this is I'm seeing a lot of things from Nigeria. And the best part about this is there's so many labels here telling me who, what, where, why, how, even when. And these are basics that you would expect to see in the media. Now that all is said and done, Laura C. says the big reporters from Washington, D.C., from New York City cannot keep going to Africa, feeling like they can do better jobs than African reporters. Daniel also thinks we're being too condescending towards Africa as a whole continent. What do you think?
Yeah. Yo, when Mo hits broke up, I was like, know what? It's never happened to us, man. Then Chalk Boys broke up. I was like, hold up, how on earth that happened to us, man? This still be the plan what we planned from the start. This still be the kind of thing we supposed to talk about. So you mean to tell me that never again Chalk Boys no go climb stage to shut down the event? People be like, you made the Chalk Boy crew. How they gonna survive in the game?